7 Great Theories about Language Learning. Introduction. Theories of language learning have been bandied about since about as far back as one would care to look. It may be surprising to know that the problems that philosophers in ancient Greece and 16th century France were concerned about are largely still relevant today. To get a quick rundown of early language learning theory, let's take a quick look at the ideas of 3 brilliant philosophers who you've probably already heard of. 1. Plato's problem. The writings of Plato stretch all the way back to the beginnings of Western philosophical thought, but Plato was already posing problems critical to modern linguistic discourse. In the nature versus nurture debate, Plato tended to side with nature, believing that knowledge was innate. This was his answer to what has become known as Plato's problem, or as Bertrand Russell summarizes it, how comes it that human beings, whose contacts with the world are brief and personal and limited, are nevertheless able to know as much as they do know? Being born with this knowledge from the get-go would naturally solve this little quandary, and consequently he viewed language as innate. 2. Cartesian linguistics, by Descartes. Centuries later, the French philosopher Descartes took a crack at linguistic philosophy. In his opinion, language acquisition was a simple and easy process, barely worthy of his attention. Like Plato, he believed in the innateness of language because he thought it reflected the general rationality of human beings. But rather than Descartes himself, it was the rationalist movement that he symbolized and that was thriving in the time period when he lived that was most important for linguistics. This Cartesian movement, according to Chomsky, who we'll get to later, noted the creativity involved in everyday language and presented the idea that there were universal principles behind every language. 3. Locke's tabula rasa. Most people familiar with Locke's philosophy have heard of his concept of tabula rasa, or the blank slate. To state it briefly and in a simplified manner, this is the idea that all knowledge comes from outside ourselves through sensory experience rather than through innate knowledge that we have at birth. This naturally carried over to language theory, with Locke rejecting the idea that there was an innate logic behind language. Obviously, these theories don't touch too much on the practical, everyday level of language learning. They're far less detailed and more philosophical than the modern scientific theories we're used to. But they have important implications. If Plato and the Cartesians are right, then the emphasis in language learning must lie on what we already know, using our innate abilities to come to an understanding of the particularities of a specific language. If Locke is right, then we must focus our attention on sensory input, gaining as much external input as possible. 4. Skinner's theory of behaviorism. In the middle of the 20th century, B.F. Skinner took Locke's ideas of sensory input and ran with them. According to behaviorism, a radical variant of which was put forward by Skinner, all behavior is no more than a response to external stimuli, and there's no innate programming within a human being to learn a language at birth. What differentiates Skinner from those who came before him is the level of detail he went into when connecting behaviorism and language learning. In his concept of what he called operant conditioning, language learning grew out of a process of reinforcement and punishment whereby individuals are conditioned into saying the right thing. For instance, if you're hungry and you're able to say, "Mommy, I'm hungry," you may be rewarded with food and your behavior will thereby be reinforced since you got what you wanted. To put it another way, Skinner described a mechanism for language learning that hadn't existed before on the tabula rasa side of the language acquisition debate. What this means for us as language learners, should his theory be even partially true, is that a process of conditioning must be achieved for us to succeed. When we say the right thing, we must be rewarded. When we say something incorrectly, that too must be made clear. In other words, we need feedback to succeed as language learners. 5. Chomsky's universal grammar. 6. Schumann's acculturation model. 7. Krashen's monitor model. These theories will be explained in next video. So subscribe and find the next video link in description.